That evening, something odd caught my eye. Two men were seated in a booth near the back, one of them nursing his drink while the other made occasional trips to other tables. Each time, he'd strike up short conversations with various women. Some exchanges ended abruptly, but a few times he pulled out an envelope filled with documents or photographs. Though I couldn't make out what he was offering, I figured he was selling something. What surprised me most was that no one from the staff seemed to care about whatever he was up to. Later, I brought it up to the group I was with, my wife, Amanda, our friends, Michael and his wife Sarah, and David with his wife Katie. We tossed around a few ideas about what they could be doing before moving on to more light-hearted topics. About half an hour later, the same man approached our table. At first, I thought he must have run out of women to approach, but as he got closer, it became clear he had something in mind. He greeted us with a casual, friendly tone, asking how we were enjoying the evening. We mumbled our responses, and he smiled politely before explaining that his friend, who was in town for business, was looking for some company. Without hesitation, he boldly asked if any of the women would be interested. I was dumbstruck by the nerve of this guy. Here we were, all clearly paired off with our spouses, and he had the audacity to suggest something like that. Before I could say anything, Sarah piped up, questioning what exactly he was proposing. The man, without missing a beat, calmly responded that his friend was well-equipped and suggested that someone in our group might want to take him up on his offer. The women started laughing, though I couldn't tell if it was out of shock or amusement. The man didn't seem fazed at all, probably used to being rejected. Katie, perhaps half-jokingly, asked how they could even know if the guy was telling the truth. Smiling, the man pulled out the same envelope I had seen earlier and produced a series of photos that apparently proved his claim. The men at our table, myself included, sat back, content to let the women handle the situation. I expected this to end with the guy being sent on his way, but instead, the women exaggerated their reactions, clearly enjoying the ridiculousness of it all. Michael, David, and I exchanged amused glances. Then came the pitch. All right, ladies, what do you say? Any of you interested? I promise you won't regret it. Sarah and Katie shook their heads, still giggling, as they handed the photos back. The man appeared ready to leave when he paused and looked directly at Amanda. Something in her expression must have caught his attention because he asked her again, "What about you? I didn't see you say no." I sat there confidently, assuming Amanda would shut him down. But to my shock, she didn't. Instead, she locked eyes with the man and, without a hint of hesitation, said, "I'm going." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Before I could process it, the man was already leading Amanda out of the booth. I tried to say something, to stop her, but my mind was spinning. Our friend sat frozen, just as stunned as I was. Somehow, I managed to stand up and grab Amanda's arm before they reached the door. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaky with disbelief. Before I could get an answer, I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. It belonged to the bouncer, easily one of the biggest guys I'd ever seen, who yanked my arm away from Amanda. I tried to explain, "She's my wife," but the bouncer wasn't having it. "Sorry, man," he said, "she said she's leaving willingly. My job is to make sure there's no trouble." I kept protesting, telling the bouncer that Amanda was my wife and I was just trying to stop her from leaving with those men. But no matter what I said, he kept his iron grip on me, making it clear he was in charge of the situation. He looked at me with a mix of sympathy and detachment, telling me he was sorry for whatever was going on in my marriage, but his job was to keep the peace. Since Amanda had told him she was leaving with the men willingly, he couldn't let me physically stop her on their property. As he held me there, Amanda leaned in and whispered something into his ear. Whatever she said made him give her a strange look, then glance back at me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked her. Amanda's expression hardened as she regained her composure, nodding with confidence. She had made up her mind. I watched helplessly as Amanda walked toward the two men waiting by the door. Desperation took over, and I called out to her, pleading for her to stop, but she didn't even glance back. She disappeared through the exit without a moment's hesitation. The bouncer still wouldn't release me, and when I tried to pull away after the door closed behind them, his grip remained firm. "Why are you still holding me?" I demanded, frustrated that they were already gone. But he just shook his head and said Amanda had asked him to keep me there a few minutes longer so I couldn't follow them. Apparently, the parking lot still counted as part of the property. The realization that Amanda had left with those men voluntarily, and even arranged for me to be held back, hit me like a punch to the gut. My strength drained away, and I stopped struggling. The fight left me. Our friends stood nearby, still in shock. After what felt like an eternity, the bouncer finally let go of me. I collapsed into the nearest chair, utterly defeated. I caught a glimpse of pity in the bouncer's eyes before he walked away, leaving me to sit in the aftermath of what had just happened. The bar had gone quiet during the whole ordeal, but now, as the drama faded, the usual hum of conversation slowly resumed. I sat there, staring blankly at the floor, tears welling up in my eyes. How could she do this to me? Was I not enough? The weight of her betrayal crushed me, but it also gave me something tangible to hold on to, a painful clarity. Michael and David helped me to my feet and led me back to the table, where Sarah and Katie did their best to comfort me, though their words were a blur. But the sight of Amanda's empty seat only fueled my determination. I threw $140 on the table, got up, and made my way to the door. "Are you leaving?" Katie asked, her voice filled with concern. "There's no point in staying," I muttered. "I've got other things to take care of." Sarah asked if I was going to wait for Amanda to come back, but I just shook my head and told her one of them should offer her a place to stay. I couldn't care less where she went at that moment. As I headed toward the door, I overheard the women asking Michael and David to do something, but they refused, saying, "No way, not after what she just pulled." I focused on the door, avoiding the sympathetic looks from everyone around us. I made it to my car and sat in the driver's seat, the flood of emotions making my head spin. My heart raced, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to pull myself together. As I sat there, I couldn't help but think about the bitter irony. It was Amanda's impulsive nature that had drawn me to her all those years ago. Now, that very trait had driven her into the arms of someone else. Halfway home, Amanda's number flashed on my phone. I thought maybe she had changed her mind, realized what she had done, and was calling for help. I answered quickly, not even bothering to say hello, ready to offer her a ride. But I was wrong. I asked where she was and offered to come pick her up, requesting the hotel and room number. But the longer the conversation went on, the more I realized she wasn't asking me to come. She didn't want me there at all. So, I shifted my approach, suggesting that maybe she should just leave the hotel, and I'd pick her up outside. It was a last-ditch effort, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't work. She calmly told me that she wasn't going anywhere and planned to stay, calling me baby like nothing had changed, as if I should just understand. She explained it wasn't about me, wasn't about her love for me, but something she simply needed to do. I begged her to rethink it, to come back to her senses, but she was firm, saying it was something she had to go through with. She reassured me, even promised, that it wouldn't hurt us, and it was just a one-time thing. At that moment, I felt nothing. My emotions went numb. Not only had she humiliated me in front of our friends and half the restaurant, but now she had the nerve to call and ask if I'd be okay with her decision. It felt like a slap to the face. I realized there was nothing left to fight for, so I told her, "I understand." I said it differently than she thought, but she took it as a sign that I was letting go. She even sounded excited, thanking me and saying she'd make it up to me once it was all over. The moment I hung up, any sadness, any remaining love I had for her vanished. Instead, a cold determination took its place. I knew it was over. When I got back to the apartment, I headed straight to the bedroom. We had kept our own luggage from before we were married, so I pulled out my 3 suitcases and began packing. I didn't have much, far less than Amanda, so I spread my things out, taking my time. I wasn't in any rush. I wanted her to feel the pain I had felt, wanted her to see me walking out, just as she had left me back at that bar. By the time I was almost done, with 2 suitcases packed and the third half full, I heard the front door open and close quietly. She must have seen the lights on and realized I was still awake. "Hey," she called softly from the hallway. "Hope you had a good time," I shot back sarcastically, not even looking up. Her reply was almost casual, as if she had just come back from some social gathering, missing the sarcasm entirely. She walked into the bedroom, and I glanced up for just a second. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smeared, and her clothes wrinkled. She looked pleased with herself, but when she saw me packing, her smile faded. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice shaky. "I'm leaving. Filing for divorce," I said flatly, continuing to pack. She stepped closer, trying to stop me, but I brushed her hand off my suitcase with a surge of anger that caught me by surprise. It reminded me of how the bouncer had yanked me back earlier that night. "Don't touch me," I said through clenched teeth. "I get it, you were going to have your fun with them no matter what I thought." I turned to her, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, how was it? Did you go with both of them, or just the main attraction?" Her face twisted with guilt, and she began pleading. She admitted that she'd always been curious, that she had never been with anyone like him before. She justified it by saying it wouldn't have been right to back out after everything that happened, especially since Desmond had put in all the effort. She promised it was done now, and she would do anything to make it right between us. I shook my head, disappointment weighing heavy in my chest. "When we got married, you promised you'd be mine forever. What does that even mean to you now?" I asked, my voice breaking with frustration. "How do you even begin to fix this?" Still, I told her I might consider moving past it, if she told me where they went. I needed to know. But Amanda refused. She kept packing her things, insisting that telling me would only make things worse. She told me to shove my apology demands and added that she was worried I'd do something reckless if I found out the hotel or the room. She said it wasn't worth it, that those guys weren't worth getting into trouble over. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. "That's for me to decide, not you," I snapped back. I asked her once again for the hotel and room number. Amanda apologized, saying she had promised to protect me when we got married, and she wouldn't let me get hurt unless I chose to. My words seemed to hit a nerve, and after a moment, she reluctantly agreed to give me the information. She kept trying to convince me to stay with her while I finished packing, but at least now she wasn't physically stopping me anymore. Even as she tried to downplay the whole situation, saying it was just sex and meant nothing to her emotionally, I could tell she was scrambling to make things right. She kept insisting she only loved me, but I had made up my mind. Her words were hollow now, they didn't carry any weight with me anymore. I had reached my breaking point. I told her straight, I wasn't interested in this version of her love. What we had, our physical connection, had meant something to me. It had been special because it was ours alone. I was the only one who had ever known her that way, and now she had just given it away like it was nothing. And the way she did it, right in front of our friends, with no regard for how humiliating it was for me, was what hurt the most. I told her how everyone at that restaurant had watched her walk out with those men, their eyes full of pity and shame as they looked at me. She cried, openly pleading with me not to leave her, saying she still loved me. But I couldn't accept that. If this was her way of showing love, then I wanted no part of it. Even if she had told me everything that night, it wouldn't have changed my decision. I told her that while I might be able to forgive her someday, I would never forget what she did or how it made me feel. That was a wound too deep to heal. I made 2 trips to load my things into my car. By the time I came back for the second load, Amanda was still on the floor. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying, mumbling, "Please, please don't leave, baby." No matter what had happened between us, or what she had done, I felt like a fool. Walking out like this didn't make me second-guess my choice, but it didn't make me feel any better either. I guess, despite everything, part of me still cared about her. As I drove to the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mess of my life, but I knew I had no other choice. When I woke up in the hotel the next morning, disoriented and drained, I realized I had crashed hard. I hadn't even noticed how exhausted I was until the adrenaline wore off. It was nearly noon by the time I pulled myself out of bed. Luckily, I'd paid for 2 days in advance, but my bank account couldn't handle staying at hotels much longer. I needed to figure something out, and fast. Amanda and I had 3 months left on the lease for our apartment. There wasn't enough money for both a new place and the one we had now, so I was faced with a tough choice: either break the lease and take the financial hit, or come up with another plan. Our assets were minimal at best. We each had a car with its own payments, so that probably wouldn't be much of an issue. The furniture was ours, but honestly, I didn't care much for it. What I did care about was involving our friends in this mess. Michael and David had been my closest friends for years, long before any of us got married. Michael and Sarah had been married for 5 years, and David and Katie were going on 4. Amanda and I had been the last ones to join the marriage club, and now, it seemed, we'd be the first to leave it. When I finally turned my phone back on, I was met with a flood of messages. Amanda had been trying to reach me, and our friends had also chimed in, urging me not to make any hasty decisions. One message from Michael stood out: he offered to help however he could. I decided to call and ended up talking to Sarah instead. I asked if I could crash at their place for a bit, just until I figured things out. Sarah agreed, but with a catch: she wouldn't stop Amanda from trying to talk to me if she showed up. She also mentioned how Amanda had been asking everyone if they'd heard from me, clearly regretting what had happened. Sarah insisted that I try to be civil, admitting that Amanda had made a huge mistake but reminding me it wasn't the end of the world. I agreed to Sarah's terms and spent the next morning moving my stuff from the hotel to their guest room. My boss let me take the morning off, though I'd have to make up for it by working late one evening. It seemed like a fair trade. That night, I stayed late at work, hoping to distract myself from everything that had gone down over the weekend. By the time I made it to Michael and Sarah's house, it was around 10 o'clock, and all I wanted was some rest. But when I walked through the door, there was Amanda, waiting for me. I was immediately on edge. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold. "I told you I didn't want to see you." She apologized, saying she was hurting without me and that she just wanted to talk. She begged me to give her a chance to make things right, to not throw everything away over what she called one mistake. But I wasn't having it. I told her I wasn't interested in fixing things. She kept pleading, saying she loved me and wanted another shot at making things work. But I reminded her that she had the chance to protect me, to save my dignity, and instead, she had refused. She hadn't told me where those guys had taken her, and that was her choice. I told her I needed time to think, time to process everything. She tried again, asking me not to give up on us, admitting she had messed up. But I emphasized just how serious her actions were and told her to leave so I could get my head straight. Amanda left with her head hung low, after a brief conversation with Sarah in the kitchen. I stayed in the living room, staring blankly at the floor as they talked quietly. When she finally left, she paused at the door, whispering, "I love you," before walking out. I sat there, feeling my resolve crumble. Sarah came and sat next to me on the couch, while Michael stood nearby, watching. Sarah told me I'd handled the situation better than most people would have, and she thanked me for staying calm. She could see how much pain I was in. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. "I didn't deserve this," I said, frustration seeping into my voice. Sarah nodded. "You're right. You don't deserve this. No one does. But Amanda is suffering too. She never expected you to leave her over this. I couldn't help but wonder if Amanda had planned it all, knowing she'd probably get away with it. Did she think she could just do this and everything would go back to normal? I asked. Sarah looked at me, her eyes soft but serious. She didn't plan it. Not like that. She only thought about it afterward, realizing the mess she'd made. I sighed and asked what Amanda had told her. Sarah hesitated before explaining that Amanda had been tempted by the idea of being with someone rich, someone who could offer a different kind of thrill. But Amanda hadn't meant for me to get caught in the middle, especially not with the bouncer holding me back. Hearing that made my blood boil. Was it even worth it? Was it at least terrible? I asked, sarcasm dripping from my words. Sarah paused, then asked, "Do you want me to lie to make it easier, or be honest?" "I think I already know the answer," I muttered, shaking my head. But Sarah went on anyway. "As much as she says it was satisfying in the moment, she told me it didn't mean anything compared to what you two have. It was just one time, and it didn't change how she feels about you." I clenched my jaw. But she still traded me for that. "She didn't know that's what she was doing," Sarah said softly. "We all make decisions, and sometimes we don't realize the consequences until it's too late." "You're right," I admitted. But even after everything, Amanda kept acting like we could just move past this. She thought that if she treated it casually enough, I'd eventually forgive her. "I hope so too," Sarah added softly. But Michael and David weren't so sure. "They know you better than anyone." "I can't see a way out of this," I said with a deep sigh. "She didn't just make a mistake, she was deliberate. She left with those men right in front of me, had me restrained, and then had the nerve to call me afterward, asking for my blessing. She had so many chances to see how much this was tearing me apart, and she still chose them over me every time." "I know it looks that way," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "But maybe she wasn't thinking clearly. It could have been a moment of complete madness. Haven't you ever done something stupid and only realized the consequences later?" I shook my head. "I appreciate you defending her, Sarah. You two have become good friends, and I get it. But you're my friend too." "I am," she said, sympathy in her eyes. "And I can see how much this has hurt you. But this isn't the same as staying up too late playing video games," I continued. "We're adults. She should have known better. Her actions led us exactly to where we are now." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "But I still believe you two were great together. If you could forgive her, I think you could be happy." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't really believe it. But I'd always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if it might happen again. I'd never feel comfortable going out to a bar or a party, always afraid she couldn't control herself. Should I really have to live like that? She made her decision, and now I have to make mine. I need to take care of myself. I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "I'm exhausted. I just need some sleep." Amanda's story played out as expected. She made attempts to patch things up, but I wasn't ready to forgive. I still loved her, and that made it hard. When you divorce someone, it's not just them you lose, it's everything you've built together. We had dreams of a future, of kids and a family. Those dreams were gone now, and sometimes, that made me want to fight for what we had even more. We had been in sync, Amanda and I, when it came to our dreams. It was like we were two halves of the same whole. But no matter how much we had in common, I couldn't overlook what she had done. It took 3 months for the divorce to be finalized. Amanda asked for one last talk after the court hearing, and I agreed to listen. We met in a small, private room. She apologized, over and over again, telling me how much she regretted what she'd done. She insisted that her actions didn't reflect how she truly felt about me, that she would regret them for the rest of her life. I looked at her, calm but resolute. I regret ever meeting you, I said. I regret proposing, and I regret marrying you. That hit her hard, but I wasn't done. I'm moving on, Amanda. There's no fixing this. She accepted it, though not without one last jab, telling me she wished I'd use my brain more and stop acting on impulse. It hurt, but I didn't say anything. I just walked out. That was the last time we ever spoke. In a strange way, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It took me a few more months before I felt like going out again. I didn't go out looking for anyone, I just couldn't stand being cooped up in my apartment anymore, replaying the same painful memories over and over. So I started joining Michael, David, Sarah, and Katie when they went out. They'd introduce me to people, dropping not-so-subtle hints that maybe it was time for me to start dating again. But I wasn't ready for anything serious. I just needed to be around people and have a little fun, no strings attached. Most of the people I met were nice, but there was no spark. I found myself drifting through conversations, politely nodding and laughing when appropriate, but never feeling that click. And as the nights passed, so did those fleeting connections. Over time, I developed a habit of going out alone, finding a strange sense of peace in being by myself. The atmosphere at the club was always lively, but it was refreshing knowing I didn't have to care about anyone else's expectations. One evening, I bumped into Maggie, the bartender at the club where everything in my life had shifted. We had gone to high school together, though we never really talked back then. She had been working at the bar for quite some time but wasn't there the night Amanda had walked out with those men. Do you remember that night? Maggie asked me as I sat down and ordered a drink. I gave a slight nod. Hard to forget. That opened the door to a new connection. Maggie and I started talking more regularly, and while it seemed she might want something more than just conversation, I wasn't ready to move past casual chatter. Then, about 10 months after Amanda left me, I saw them again, Nathan and Ryan. They were back at the same club, scanning the crowd like predators, probably looking for their next target. Maggie noticed me watching them. You're staring at Nathan and Ryan, she said, her voice laced with curiosity. That piqued my interest. You know them? Of course, she shrugged. They're regulars. Work down at a warehouse off Main Street. They come in all the time, looking to pick up women. My stomach turned. So they live around here? Yeah, been in town for years, she answered casually. You wouldn't believe how successful they are. Doesn't matter if the women are married or single. They get what they want. I clenched my jaw, feeling my anger build. That sounds risky, I muttered. Maggie shrugged again, as if the whole thing was just another day in the life. Most of the husbands don't even know. The wives keep it quiet, and the guys aren't violent or anything. It's like a win-win for everyone. I stared at her, stunned by her nonchalance. No harm done. I repeated, disbelief coating my words. She grinned like it was a joke. Wives get to have their fun, and sometimes they go home feeling guilty and treat their husbands better. Everybody gets something out of it, you know. At that moment, I realized I couldn't see Maggie in the same way anymore. If she was this comfortable with the idea, she wouldn't hesitate to engage in it herself. It was disappointing, because I thought for a second that maybe I could move forward with someone. But not her. She wasn't the one. Maggie kept talking, unaware of my inner conflict. There was this one time Nathan and Ryan almost started a fight with a guy because they tried to pick up his wife while he was at the same club. The wife asked the bouncer to hold her husband back so she could leave with them. It was wild. I turned slowly to look at her, my heart pounding in my chest. You mean? Maggie's expression changed as she pieced it together. Her eyes widened. Oh my God, she whispered. That was your wife. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Her words felt empty, like a distant echo. I stood up from the bar, needing air, needing space. Without another word, I walked outside, trying to pull myself together. The pieces had fallen into place. It was all a scam. Nathan and Ryan weren't some random guys passing through town. They were locals, and they'd been doing this for who knows how long. Amanda might have accepted their offer, but I was convinced she had no idea these men would be back, pulling the same stunt with other couples. And I couldn't let them keep doing it. As I stepped outside, I made a quick phone call. Revenge hadn't been on my mind before, but now that I knew the truth, I couldn't let it slide. Nathan and Ryan were not going to get away with it this time. I had singled out their car in the parking lot earlier. It wasn't hard to figure out. The Cadillac with lowered suspension and flashy chrome rims stood out. While they were still working the room, I had time. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew I couldn't let them keep going without consequences. After about an hour, they finally left the club, a woman on each arm. I was right about the car. I was waiting by the driver's side when they approached. Marcus, the apparent leader, was the first to speak. "Do you mind getting your hands off my ride?" he asked, his voice sharp. I ignored him, addressing the slightly intoxicated woman with them. "Sweetheart," I said firmly, "you should find somewhere else to be. Like at home, with your husband, the one you promised to forsake all others for." She seemed confused at first, but after a moment, she glanced at the men and then back at me. Without a word, she turned and disappeared back into the club, leaving Marcus and Ryan alone with me. They were furious. "Who the hell do you think you are, man?" Ryan asked, stepping toward me. I stayed calm. "I'm the guy who's tired of watching you two wreck people's lives." Marcus squinted at me, recognition dawning on his face. "Hey, I know you. You're the husband from last year. Your wife, she left with us." I clenched my fists but held my ground. "That's right. But I'm not here for her. I'm here for you too." Before they could react, my friends, Tom, Rick, and Jed, emerged from the shadows. Within moments, Marcus and Ryan were on their knees, their arms pinned behind their backs. "What's going on?" Marcus stammered, panic setting in. "You're going to learn a lesson tonight," I said coldly, stepping closer to them. "One you'll never forget." We drove them out to a secluded area, miles from town. By the time we arrived, they were begging, pleading for mercy. But mercy wasn't on the agenda. We didn't kill them. We didn't even maim them. But we made sure they'd remember that night every time they looked in the mirror. It wasn't long after that night that Marcus and Ryan vanished from town. I never saw them again. I heard rumors that they had moved to another city, but I didn't care. They were someone else's problem now. As for Emily, formerly Christ, I heard through mutual friends that she had started seeing someone new. I didn't care much about that either. My life was moving forward, slowly but surely. The pain of what she had done was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had taken back my life. Months passed, and the memory of what happened with Emily began to fade into the background. Life had a way of continuing whether you wanted it to or not. I kept myself busy with work, hanging out with friends, and slowly building a new routine. It was far from perfect, and I still had moments where the pain would surface unexpectedly, like when I'd see a couple holding hands or hear a song we used to dance to. But overall, I was healing. One night, I was out at a different bar, one I hadn't been to before, just wanting to escape the usual places and faces. The music was low, the crowd was thin, and I liked the anonymity of it. As I sat there nursing a drink, I noticed a woman across the bar. She was sitting alone, just like I was, her face partially obscured by her long dark hair. Something about her caught my attention. Maybe it was her air of quiet confidence or the way she seemed completely at ease in her solitude. I wasn't in the mood to start something new, but curiosity got the best of me. I signaled the bartender, "Send a drink to the lady over there," I said, nodding in her direction. He glanced at her, then back at me, and gave a slight nod. The drink arrived, and she looked up, scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. I gave her a small smile, nothing more, and waited to see what she would do. After a moment, she picked up the drink, took a sip, and raised her glass in a silent toast. Then she did something I didn't expect. She got up and walked over to me. "Thanks for the drink," she said, her voice low but friendly. "You're welcome," I replied, motioning to the empty seat beside me. "Mind if I join you?" She slid into the seat, and for the next hour or so, we talked. Her name was Julia, and she was new to town. She was sharp, funny, and there was a lightness about her that made the conversation flow easily. We talked about everything except our past relationships. Neither of us seemed eager to go down that road. It felt good, though, to connect with someone without the baggage that had been weighing me down for so long. As the night wore on, I realized that for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Emily. I wasn't replaying the betrayal or second-guessing myself. I was just, there, in the moment, with Julia. And it felt good. "What do you do?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "I'm a graphic designer," she said. "I freelance, so it's been interesting getting clients in a new city." "What about you?" "I work in construction," I said. "Mostly project management now, but I still get my hands dirty sometimes." She smiled. "That's cool. I bet it's satisfying seeing something tangible come out of your work." "It is," I said, nodding. "There's something grounding about it." We sat there, talking for what felt like hours. Eventually, the bar started to empty out, and I knew the night was coming to an end. Julia stood up, grabbing her coat. "Well, it's getting late," she said. "Thanks for the drink and the company." "Anytime," I said, standing up as well. "Maybe we could do it again sometime." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Yeah, maybe." With that, she gave me a small smile and walked out of the bar, leaving me with a strange sense of possibility. I didn't know if I'd see her again, but I wasn't going to overthink it. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I didn't need to rush anything. The following weeks were a blur of work and routine, but something had shifted. I felt lighter. I even started going out with friends more, and while I hadn't seen Julia since that night, I found myself thinking about her from time to time. It was nice to think about something, or someone, other than my past. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from Chris. "Hey man, got a minute?" he asked. "Yeah, what's up?" "I ran into Emily the other day," he said, his voice cautious, like he wasn't sure how I'd react. "She asked about you." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but I pushed it down. "What did she say?" "She said she's been thinking about you. That she wants to talk." I sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I'm not sure what there is to say, Chris. We signed the papers. It's done." "I know," he said. But she sounded different. Not like before. "I think she regrets it. A lot." "It's too late for that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "She made her choice." Chris didn't push the issue, and we changed the subject. But after I hung up, I couldn't help but think about Emily's message. Part of me wondered what she wanted to say, what she could possibly hope to accomplish by talking now. But the stronger part of me knew that nothing she said would change the fact that it was over. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. A few days later, while I was working late at the office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Julia. You free for a drink this weekend?" I stared at the message for a moment, a slow smile creeping across my face. Maybe things were finally starting to fall into place. I texted her back, "Yeah, I'd like that." That weekend, I met Julia for drinks again, and this time it felt even easier. There was a comfort in being around her, a feeling that I hadn't realized I missed. As the evening stretched on, I realized that whatever this was between us, it felt right. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The shadow of what happened with Emily would always be there, lingering somewhere in the background, but it no longer controlled me. I was moving forward, step by step, and whatever came next, I knew I was ready for it.